In the heart of Atlanta, a city buzzing with ambition and dreams, there lived a man named Richard. He was tall, sharply dressed, and carried himself with an air of confidence that made people turn their heads. Richard wasn't just another businessman. He was a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from scratch. His name was often mentioned in newspapers, and his face appeared on billboards advertising luxury brands. But behind the polished exterior and flashy lifestyle, Richard harbored secrets that would one day change his life forever. It all began during one of Richard's many business trips to Atlanta. The city was hosting a charity gala aimed at raising funds for underprivileged children. Richard attended these events not because he cared deeply about the causes. They were more like networking opportunities where he could rub shoulders with influential people. That night, however, something unexpected happened. Among the sea of well-dressed attendees, Richard noticed a woman standing near the bar. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or dripping in jewels like the others. Instead, she wore a simple blue dress that complemented her warm smile. Her name was Maya. Maya worked as a nurse at a local hospital. Unlike Richard, whose days revolved around boardroom meetings and million-dollar deals, Maya spent her time caring for patients and saving lives. She had been invited to the gala by a colleague who thought it might be a nice break from her hectic schedule. At first, Maya felt out of place among the wealthy crowd, but her natural charm quickly won over those around her. When Richard approached her to strike up a conversation, she didn't recognize him as the famous tycoon everyone talked about. To her, he was just another guest trying to make small talk. Their conversation started casually, with Richard asking about her work, and Maya sharing stories from the hospital. As they talked, Richard found himself captivated by her honesty and humor. For once, he wasn't thinking about closing deals or expanding his company. He was simply enjoying the moment. Over the next few weeks, Richard made excuses to visit Atlanta more frequently than necessary, always finding ways to bump into Maya. They went out for coffee, strolled through parks, and even attended a jazz concert together. Slowly but surely, a bond formed between them. Despite their differences, his lavish lifestyle versus her modest existence, they discovered common ground in their shared love for music and art. Maya admired Richard's drive and ambition, while Richard appreciated Maya's down-to-earth nature and compassion. Their relationship blossomed, and before long they were inseparable. Friends and colleagues noticed how happy Richard seemed whenever Maya was around. Even Maya's close-knit family warmed up to him, despite some initial skepticism about his extravagant world. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One morning, Maya woke up feeling uneasy. Suspecting it might be stress from work, she brushed it off. However, after a few weeks of persistent symptoms, she decided to take a pregnancy test. The result left her stunned. She was pregnant. At first, Maya struggled to process the news. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother, but this was unplanned and complicated. How would Richard react? Would he want to be involved? Gathering her courage, she called him to share the news. Richard listened silently as Maya explained everything over the phone. On the other end of the line, his mind raced. A baby? With Maya? While part of him felt a flicker of excitement at the idea of starting a family, fear quickly overshadowed it. He imagined the scandal that would erupt if word got out. A wealthy, white man having a child with a black woman. It wasn't just societal judgment he feared. It was also the potential damage to his reputation and career. After a long pause, Richard told Maya he needed time to think. Days turned into weeks, and Richard distanced himself from Maya. His calls became shorter, his visits rarer. Eventually, he stopped contacting her altogether. Maya tried reaching out, hoping to resolve things, but Richard avoided her messages. Heartbroken and confused, Maya realized she couldn't rely on him. Though she had hoped for a different outcome, she refused to let despair consume her. She vowed to raise her child alone, determined to give him or her the best life possible. As the months passed, Maya returned to her hometown, a quiet little town where everyone knew each other. There, surrounded by supportive friends and family, she prepared for the arrival of her baby. Meanwhile, Richard threw himself into work, burying his guilt under mountains of projects and meetings. Outwardly, he appeared successful and unstoppable. Inside, however, he couldn't shake off the image of Maya's disappointed eyes or the thought of the child he had walked away from. Back in her hometown, Maya gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. She named him Elijah, meaning, "God is my strength." From the moment he entered her life, Elijah filled Maya's days with laughter and purpose. Though money was tight, Maya worked tirelessly to provide for him. She juggled shifts at the hospital, cooked meals on a budget, and stitched clothes, by hand when store-bought ones were too expensive. Despite the challenges, she never complained. Her son was her greatest joy, and she poured every ounce of love into raising him. Elijah grew up knowing only his mother's side of the story. Whenever he asked about his father, Maya answered vaguely, saying he was someone who couldn't be part of their lives. Though curious, Elijah didn't press further. Instead, he focused on making his mother proud. He excelled in school, joined the church choir, and developed a passion for playing the piano. By the time he reached high school, Elijah had become a pillar of the community, kind-hearted, hard-working, and full of promise. Meanwhile, Richard continued climbing the ladder of success. His company expanded globally, earning him accolades and wealth beyond measure. Yet no matter how much he achieved, he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something, or someone, was missing. Late at night, when the noise of his luxurious penthouse faded, thoughts of Maya and the child he abandoned crept back into his mind. He wondered what kind of person his child had grown into and whether he'd ever have the chance to meet him or her. Little did Richard know, fate had already set its wheels in motion. 21 years after that fateful encounter in Atlanta, their paths would cross again in a way neither of them could have predicted. Until then, both Richard and Maya carried the weight of their past decisions, unaware that redemption and a new beginning was closer than they thought. Maya returned to her hometown with a heavy heart but a fierce determination to give her son the best life possible. The small town was a stark contrast to the bustling city of Atlanta, where skyscrapers and busy streets dominated the landscape. Here the pace was slower, and life revolved around family, faith, and community. Everyone knew each other, and news traveled fast. Whether it was about a new baby in town or someone's garden blooming especially well that year. Despite the challenges she faced as a single mother, Maya found solace in the familiarity and warmth of her surroundings. Elijah's arrival brought both joy and responsibility into Maya's life. From the moment she held him in her arms, she vowed to protect him from the harsh realities of the world. She worked tirelessly at the local hospital, often pulling double shifts to make ends meet. On days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she reminded herself of the promise she had made. No matter how hard things got, she would never let Elijah feel unloved or unwanted. Her sacrifices were countless, but they came naturally, because her love for her son knew no bounds. As Elijah grew older, his curiosity about his father deepened. At school, kids talked about their dads, how they played catch in the backyard, helped them with homework, or cheered them on during soccer games. Elijah listened quietly, wondering what it would be like to have a father figure in his life. One evening, while helping Maya fold laundry, he asked, "Mom, why doesn't my dad live with us?" The question caught Maya off guard, and for a moment, she hesitated. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? Maya knelt beside Elijah, looking into his wide, innocent eyes. "Your daddy. He wasn't ready to be a part of our lives," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean he didn't care about you. Sometimes people make choices they regret later." Though her words were vague, they carried a weight of truth. Elijah nodded, accepting her explanation without pressing further. He trusted his mother completely and believed whatever she told him. Still, the absence of a father lingered in the back of his mind, shaping his understanding of the world in subtle ways. Despite this void, Elijah thrived under Maya's guidance. She instilled in him values that would shape his character: kindness, resilience, and gratitude. When other kids teased him for not having fancy clothes or the latest gadgets, Maya taught him to hold his head high. Material things don't define who you are, she would say. What matters is how you treat others and the effort you put into your dreams. These lessons stuck with Elijah, helping him navigate the ups and downs of growing up. By the time Elijah reached middle school, his musical talent began to shine. A neighbor gifted him an old keyboard, which became his prized possession. Hours after finishing his homework, Elijah would sit by the window, experimenting with melodies and teaching himself to play songs by ear. His fingers danced across the keys, creating harmonies that filled their modest home with beauty. Maya watched proudly, knowing her son had inherited a gift that set him apart. Recognizing his potential, Maya enrolled Elijah in free music classes offered by the church. It wasn't long before he became the star of the choir, impressing everyone with his voice and piano skills. Teachers praised his dedication, noting how he practiced even when others took breaks. "You've got a special talent," one of them told him once. "Don't let anything stop you from pursuing it." Outside of music, Elijah excelled academically. He was curious about the world and eager to learn. Whether it was solving complex math problems or writing essays about history, he approached every subject with enthusiasm. His teachers often remarked that he had a bright future ahead of him if he stayed focused. Maya encouraged his studies, sacrificing luxuries to buy secondhand textbooks and ensuring he attended tutoring sessions whenever needed. As Elijah entered high school, he became a role model in their community. Neighbors admired his humility and work ethic, while classmates sought his advice on assignments and projects. Even the local pastor invited him to lead youth programs, recognizing his ability to inspire others. Yet despite his achievements, Elijah remained grounded, always crediting his success to his mother's unwavering support. Meanwhile, Maya continued working long hours at the hospital, juggling her responsibilities as a nurse and a single parent. There were days when fatigue overwhelmed her, leaving dark circles under her eyes and a heaviness in her steps. But she pushed through, driven by the thought of giving Elijah opportunities she hadn't had herself. Friends and family offered to help, but Maya politely declined, insisting she wanted to provide for her son independently. One summer afternoon, as Elijah sat practicing a new piece on the piano, Maya walked in holding 2 envelopes. "Look what came in the mail today," she said, handing him one. Inside was a letter congratulating him on being awarded a scholarship to a prestigious music academy. Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Elijah. You've worked so hard for this." The second envelope contained an invitation to a National Youth Leadership Conference, where Elijah had been selected to represent his school. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to dream big for her son. Perhaps these opportunities would open doors she couldn't imagine, a chance for Elijah to step into a world far beyond their small town. Yet, amidst all the excitement, Maya couldn't shake the lingering thought of Richard. What would he think? If he saw Elijah now, would he feel pride or regret? She wondered whether fate might someday bring them together again, forcing Richard to face the consequences of his actions. Until then, she focused on nurturing her son, preparing him for whatever lay ahead. Unbeknownst to Maya, Richard's life was also changing, though in ways he hadn't anticipated. Years of burying himself in work had left him emotionally hollow. Success no longer brought him satisfaction. Instead, it felt like a mask hiding deeper insecurities. Late at night, alone in his penthouse, Richard stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker below. He thought about the choices he'd made, the relationships he'd neglected, the responsibilities he'd abandoned. And most of all, he thought about the child he had never met. One day, Richard received a proposal from his PR team to launch a foundation aimed at supporting talented young artists. The idea resonated with him, perhaps because it stirred memories of his own childhood, dreams, or maybe because it offered a way to leave a legacy beyond wealth. Without hesitation, he approved the project, unaware that it would soon connect him to a part of his past he had tried so desperately to forget. Back in the small town, Elijah prepared for his journey to the music academy, unaware of the ripple effect his accomplishments would create. His story, a tale of resilience, talent, and determination, was about to intersect with Richard's in ways neither of them could foresee. As destiny drew its threads tighter, the stage was set for a reunion that would change their lives forever. Richard's life in the city was a whirlwind of meetings, galas, and endless obligations. His days were filled with phone calls to investors, presentations in boardrooms, and interviews with reporters eager to capture his thoughts on success. To the outside world, he was the epitome of achievement, a man who had conquered every challenge thrown his way. But behind closed doors, Richard carried a weight that no amount of money or accolades could lift. The guilt of abandoning Maya and their child haunted him like a shadow, lurking in the corners of his mind whenever he allowed himself a moment of quiet. It wasn't that Richard didn't care about his son. Rather, it was fear that paralyzed him. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, and most of all, fear of facing the consequences of his actions. Over the years, he had convinced himself that walking away had been the right decision, that staying would have only caused more harm than good. Yet deep down he knew the truth: he had been selfish. He had prioritized his career and reputation over the life he had helped create. Despite his efforts to bury the past, reminders of it surfaced unexpectedly. Once, while attending a charity event for underprivileged children, Richard found himself staring at a young boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to how he looked as a child. For a brief moment he imagined what it might feel like to hold his own son, to see pieces of himself reflected in another person. The thought startled him, and he quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. These fleeting moments became more frequent as time went on, gnawing at the edges of his conscience. Then came the idea for the foundation. It started as a suggestion from his public relations team, a way to enhance his image by giving back to society. A scholarship program for talented young artists, they pitched enthusiastically. You'll be seen as a visionary supporting the next generation. At first, Richard dismissed it as just another PR stunt, but something about the proposal resonated with him. Perhaps it was the word talent that caught his attention, or maybe it was the idea of nurturing potential, something he had failed to do with his own child. Whatever the reason, Richard agreed to move forward with the project. He poured resources into building the foundation, ensuring it would be nothing short of exceptional. Prestigious universities partnered with them, renowned musicians joined as mentors, and applications poured in from across the country. Each submission told a unique story of struggles overcome, passions pursued, and dreams nurtured against all odds. Richard skimmed through hundreds of profiles, nodding approvingly at the talent displayed. But one application stood out among the rest. Elijah's file arrived with glowing recommendations from teachers and community leaders. His essay spoke of resilience, gratitude, and a love for music that transcended circumstances. Accompanying the application were recordings of Elijah playing the piano, his fingers dancing effortlessly across the keys. The melodies were soulful, evoking emotions Richard hadn't felt in years. As he listened, a strange sensation washed over him, a mix of admiration and familiarity. There was something about this young man that felt personal. Curiosity got the better of Richard. He requested to meet the finalists personally, wanting to understand the people behind the applications. When the day arrived, he walked into the grand hall where the candidates were gathered, expecting to see nervous teenagers clutching folders and rehearsing introductions. Instead, he was greeted by confident individuals eager to share their stories. And then, there was Elijah. Standing near the window, bathed in soft sunlight, Elijah introduced himself with a smile that lit up the room. Richard froze mid-step. The resemblance was undeniable. Elijah's features mirrored his own, the sharp jawline, the piercing eyes, even the confident posture. For a split second, Richard forgot how to breathe. Memories of Maya flooded back, her laughter, her warmth, the way she made him feel alive during those fleeting months in Atlanta. Here, standing before him, was living proof of the life they had created together. Elijah, unaware of the storm brewing inside Richard, shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Thompson," he said politely. "Your foundation means so much to me and to others like me." Richard managed a weak smile, struggling to find words. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me, Elijah, why did you choose music?" The question seemed to catch Elijah off guard, but he answered thoughtfully. "Music is my escape. It's where I can express everything I can't put into words. My mom always says art has the power to heal and connect people. I want to use my talent to inspire others just like it inspires me." As Elijah spoke, Richard noticed the sincerity in his voice, the same sincerity Maya had once shown him. He wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper, but the presence of other candidates and staff reminded him of where they were. Reluctantly, he moved on to the next finalist, though his mind remained fixated on Elijah. That night, unable to sleep, Richard sat alone in his study, staring at Elijah's application. Questions swirled in his head. Could this really be his son? Was it possible that fate had brought them together after all these years? He wrestled with doubt and hope, torn between confronting the truth and leaving it buried. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered. "It's Richard," he said hesitantly. "I need your help with something." The next morning, Richard hired a private investigator to look into Elijah's background. Within days, the investigator returned with a report that confirmed Richard's worst fears and deepest hopes. Elijah was indeed his son. Holding the document in his hands, Richard felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Guilt for abandoning Maya, regret for missing out on 2 decades of his son's life, and surprisingly relief for finally knowing the truth. He realized he couldn't undo the past, but perhaps he could make amends. Summoning his courage, Richard reached out to Maya. After exchanging a few tense messages, they agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in her hometown. When Richard arrived, he barely recognized Maya. Gone was the vibrant young woman he remembered. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more composed. Her eyes, however, still held the same warmth that had drawn him to her years ago. They sat across from each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Richard broke it. "Maya, I'm sorry," he began, his voice trembling. "For everything. I should have been there. For you. For Elijah. I let my fears get in the way, and I've regretted it every single day since." Maya studied him carefully, searching for signs of insincerity. Finding none, she sighed. "Apologies don't change the past, Richard. You left when we needed you most. Raising Elijah alone wasn't easy, but I did it because I had to. He's an incredible young man, and he deserves better than what you gave us." Richard nodded, accepting her words without protest. "I know I can't erase what I've done, but I want to make things right if you'll let me. I want to meet him to explain who I am and why I wasn't there. I owe him that much." Maya hesitated, weighing the risks. She knew introducing Elijah to Richard could stir up old wounds, but she also believed in giving her son the chance to understand his full identity. "If you're serious about this, I won't stand in your way," she said finally. "But remember, Elijah is my priority. If you hurt him, you'll answer to me." With that agreement, Richard prepared to take the biggest step of his life, one that would force him to confront the consequences of his choices and redefine what it meant to be a father. Little did he know, this journey would not only change his relationship with Elijah, but also teach him lessons about redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. The day Richard finally met Elijah again was both nerve-wracking and surreal. This time, it wasn't in a crowded hall filled with other scholarship finalists, but in a quiet park near Maya's hometown. Maya had insisted on keeping things low-key, wanting to ensure Elijah felt comfortable before revealing the full truth. She knew this meeting would be life-changing for her son, and she wanted to handle it delicately. Richard, too, approached the encounter with a mix of anticipation and dread. He rehearsed what he would say over and over in his mind, yet none of the words seemed adequate to bridge the gap of 21 years. Elijah arrived at the park wearing jeans and a simple hoodie, carrying his ever-present notebook where he jotted down song lyrics and melodies. He greeted Richard warmly, still unaware of their true connection. "Thanks for taking the time to meet me, Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I really appreciate everything your foundation is doing." Richard shook Elijah's hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. The young man standing before him radiated the same charm and confidence that Richard himself had possessed at that age. But there was also something uniquely Elijah, his humility, his kindness, his genuine gratitude. It struck Richard how much of Maya's spirit lived within him. For a moment, Richard struggled to find his voice. Clearing his throat, he replied, "It's my pleasure, Elijah. I've been impressed by your talent and dedication. You remind me of someone important." Elijah tilted his head curiously. "Oh, who's that?" Richard hesitated, unsure if now was the right time to reveal the truth. Instead, he steered the conversation toward safer topics. They talked about music, art, and Elijah's aspirations. Richard listened intently as Elijah shared stories about growing up in a small town, playing piano in church, and dreaming of performing on bigger stages. Each word painted a vivid picture of a life shaped by resilience and love, a life Richard hadn't been part of, but desperately wished he had been. As they walked along the park's winding paths, Richard found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He spoke about his own childhood, his struggles, and the sacrifices he'd made to build his empire. Elijah listened attentively, nodding occasionally, as though piecing together fragments of a puzzle. "You're lucky," Elijah said after a pause. "Not everyone gets to chase their dreams the way you did, but sometimes I wonder if chasing success comes at a cost." The comment hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Was Elijah referring to his absent father? Or was it just a casual observation? Either way, it forced Richard to confront the reality of his choices. Here was a young man who had grown up without a father, yet he carried no bitterness, only wisdom beyond his years. Richard realized that Elijah's strength came not from privilege or wealth, but from the values instilled by Maya. Finally, unable to delay the inevitable any longer, Richard decided it was time to tell the truth. They stopped under the shade of a large oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Richard took a deep breath and turned to face Elijah. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Elijah frowned slightly, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Okay. What is it?" Richard looked directly into Elijah's eyes, seeing echoes of his younger self staring back. "Elijah, I'm your father." For a few seconds there was silence. The world around them seemed to freeze. The rustling leaves, the distant laughter of children, the chirping birds, all muted as Elijah processed the words. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to something unreadable. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know this must come as a surprise," Richard continued quickly, afraid Elijah might walk away. "Believe me, I never intended for things to turn out this way. When I learned about you, I panicked. I let fear and selfishness guide my decisions, and I abandoned you and your mother. That's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life." Elijah blinked, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "So, all these years, you knew about me? And you didn't bother to reach out?" "It's complicated," Richard admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I convinced myself it was better this way, that I wasn't fit to be a father. But seeing you today, hearing your story, I realize how wrong I was. You deserve to know the truth, even if it's painful." Elijah stepped back, putting some distance between them. His mind raced with questions. Why had his mother never mentioned Richard's name? Had she known he was wealthy and powerful? Did she think Elijah wouldn't care? Most importantly, why had Richard stayed away for so long? "I don't know what to say," Elijah murmured, his voice trembling. "This is a lot to take in." "I understand," Richard said softly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. All I'm asking for is a chance to explain, to listen, to be part of your life if you'll let me." Elijah crossed his arms, his thoughts swirling like a storm. On one hand, he felt betrayed, not just by Richard, but by the absence of a father figure throughout his childhood. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the strange sense of familiarity he felt around Richard. It was as if pieces of his identity were finally falling into place. "Why now?" he asked abruptly. "After all these years, why are you telling me this now?" Richard sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Because I saw your application, because I heard your music, because I realized I can't keep running from the past. Meeting you made me see what I've missed and what I could still gain if you're willing to give me a chance." Elijah studied Richard's face, searching for sincerity. Despite the anger bubbling inside him, he saw regret etched in every line, every wrinkle. Slowly, he nodded. "I need time to process this," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to hear you out. Not for you, but for me. I want to understand who I am and where I come from." Relief washed over Richard, though he knew this was only the beginning. Rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to try. Together, they agreed to meet again soon, this time with Maya present. As they parted ways, Elijah couldn't shake the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. He returned home, his mind replaying Richard's confession over and over. When Elijah told Maya about the revelation, she braced herself for his reaction. To her surprise, he didn't lash out or accuse her of hiding the truth. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions, seeking clarity rather than conflict. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked gently. Maya sat beside him, holding his hands in hers. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you were missing something or someone. Your father chose to leave, Elijah. I didn't want his absence to define you. You've always been enough exactly as you are." Elijah nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I get that, Mom, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But knowing the truth, it changes things. It doesn't erase what we have, it just adds another layer to it." Over the next few weeks, Elijah and Richard began meeting regularly. Their conversations started cautiously, with Richard sharing memories of his early days in business and Elijah recounting moments from his childhood. Gradually, they found common ground, not just in their shared DNA, but in their mutual love for music and storytelling. Richard introduced Elijah to new opportunities, arranging private lessons with renowned musicians and securing invitations to exclusive concerts. Though Elijah appreciated these gestures, he valued something far more, the chance to truly know his father. Meanwhile, Maya watched from the sidelines, ensuring Richard didn't overstep. She reminded him repeatedly that Elijah's happiness came first. "He's strong because of the life we built together," she told Richard firmly. "Don't try to replace that. Just add to it." As months passed, their unconventional family dynamic began to take shape. Richard, Maya, and Elijah navigated their complex history with patience and understanding. Mistakes were made, tempers flared, and old wounds reopened, but so did doors to healing and growth. For the first time in years, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. He realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future. One note, one conversation, one heartfelt apology at a time. And Elijah? He discovered a newfound appreciation for his roots. Knowing his father didn't diminish the love he had for his mother. Instead, it enriched his perspective on life. He learned that family isn't defined solely by blood or presence, but by the bonds we choose to nurture and the legacies we create together. As the weeks turned into months, Elijah, Richard, and Maya continued to navigate their complicated yet evolving relationship. Each interaction brought new revelations, challenges, and moments of connection that slowly began to mend the fractures of the past. For Elijah, this journey was like piecing together a puzzle where some pieces fit perfectly, while others required careful reshaping. He had always dreamed of understanding his full identity, but now that he was living it, he realized how delicate and transformative the process could be. Richard threw himself into being present for Elijah, determined to make up for lost time. At first, his efforts were clumsy and overly extravagant. A private jet to New York for a concert, reservations at five-star restaurants, gifts wrapped in expensive packaging. These gestures left Elijah uncomfortable rather than impressed. "Dad," he said one evening after declining an invitation to a luxury resort, "I don't need all this. What I want is us. Just spend time with me." The simplicity of Elijah's request struck a chord in Richard. It forced him to rethink his approach and focus on creating meaningful memories instead of material ones. He started taking Elijah to places that mattered to him: his childhood home, the park where he used to play basketball as a teenager, and even the small diner where he'd worked during college. Along the way, Richard shared stories about his own struggles and triumphs, painting a picture of a man who had once been unsure and vulnerable, much like Elijah felt now. For Elijah, these outings became opportunities to see a side of Richard he hadn't expected. Beneath the polished exterior of a millionaire businessman lay someone flawed, human, and deeply remorseful. During one of their visits to the diner, Richard confessed how he'd worked long hours flipping burgers to save money for college. "Back then, I didn't think I'd amount to much," he admitted, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "But I learned early on that hard work pays off, even if it takes years." Elijah listened intently, realizing how much of Richard's drive mirrored his own determination. Though their lives had taken vastly different paths, they shared a common thread: resilience. This realization helped Elijah soften toward his father, allowing room for forgiveness to grow. Still, he couldn't ignore the lingering questions about why Richard had stayed away for so long. One afternoon, as they sat by a lake watching ducks paddle across the water, Elijah finally asked the question that had weighed heavily on his mind. "Why didn't you come back sooner? Even when you found out about me, why did you wait until now?" Richard sighed, knowing this moment would eventually come. "Fear," he replied honestly. "I was afraid of messing things up again, afraid of what people might say, or worse, what you might think of me. I convinced myself that staying away was the best thing I could do. But looking back, I see how wrong I was. Running from my mistakes only made them bigger." His vulnerability caught Elijah off guard. For the first time, he saw Richard not as the powerful figurehead everyone admired, but as a man grappling with regret and longing. It wasn't easy to reconcile the two images, but it gave Elijah a clearer understanding of the complexities of parenthood and forgiveness. Meanwhile, Maya played a crucial role in keeping their fragile bond intact. She remained Elijah's anchor, ensuring Richard's involvement complemented rather than overshadowed the life she had built for her son. Whenever tensions arose, Maya stepped in as a mediator, reminding both men of the importance of patience and communication. "You're building something new here," she told them one evening over dinner. "It won't happen overnight, but if you're both willing to try, it'll be worth it." Her words resonated deeply with Elijah, who had grown accustomed to relying solely on his mother for guidance. Having Richard in his life added another layer of support, one that came with its own set of expectations and uncertainties. Yet Elijah found solace in knowing that no matter what happened, Maya would always be there to ground him. Music remained a central part of their connection. Richard discovered Elijah's talent firsthand when he attended one of his performances at a local jazz festival. Sitting in the audience, Richard watched in awe as his son commanded the stage, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the piano keys. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, evoking emotions Richard hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. When the performance ended, he approached Elijah backstage, tears glistening in his eyes. "That was incredible," Richard said, pulling Elijah into a heartfelt embrace. "You have a gift, Elijah. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Elijah smiled, touched by his father's sincerity. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot coming from you." Their shared love for music opened doors to deeper conversations. They spent hours discussing composers, improvisation techniques, and the emotional power of art. Through these exchanges, Richard learned more about Elijah's passions and aspirations. while Elijah gained insight into his father's creative side, a facet of Richard he hadn't known existed before. Yet despite the progress they made, old wounds occasionally resurfaced. One evening, during a family dinner arranged by Maya, Elijah voiced a concern that had been troubling him. "Do you think you're trying to buy your way into my life?" he asked Richard bluntly. "All these scholarships, connections, it feels like you're using your wealth to make up for everything." Richard froze, taken aback by the accusation. After a moment, he nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "I've relied too much on what I can offer materially because I didn't know how else to show I care. But I'm learning, Elijah. Every day I'm learning what it means to be a father, not just financially, but emotionally." Maya placed a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Your dad isn't perfect, sweetheart, none of us are. But he's trying, and that counts for something." Elijah considered her words, letting them sink in. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about acknowledging growth. Over time, he began to appreciate Richard's efforts, seeing them not as attempts to compensate but as genuine expressions of love. As the months passed, their relationship evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Richard introduced Elijah to influential figures in the music industry, helping him secure internships and mentorships that broadened his horizons. In return, Elijah taught Richard the value of humility and authenticity. Together they formed a partnership rooted in mutual respect and admiration. One pivotal moment occurred when Elijah was invited to perform at Carnegie Hall. It was a dream come true, one he had worked tirelessly to achieve. As he stood backstage, preparing for the performance, Richard approached him holding a small box. Inside was a gold pocket watch engraved with the words, "Time heals, but love endures." "This belonged to my grandfather," Richard explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave it to me when I graduated college. Now I want you to have it, to remind you that no matter what happens, we're connected, for better or worse." Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes as he accepted the gift. For the first time, he truly felt like he was part of something larger than himself, a legacy shaped by choices, sacrifices, and second chances. That night, as Elijah played his final piece, on stage he dedicated it to three people: his mother for her unwavering strength, his father for finding his way back, and himself for embracing the journey ahead. The audience erupted in applause, but for Elijah, the real victory lay in the healing that had begun within his family. Through laughter, tears, and countless conversations, Richard, Maya, and Elijah proved that redemption is possible, even after decades of separation. Their story wasn't just about bloodlines or missed opportunities. It was about the courage to face the past, the willingness to rebuild, and the unbreakable bonds forged through love and forgiveness. The years that followed Elijah's Carnegie Hall performance marked a turning point for Richard, Maya, and Elijah. Their journey from strangers bound by blood to a family united by choice was far from smooth, but it was deeply transformative. Each of them had grown in ways they never imagined, learning not only about each other but also about themselves. What began as an uneasy reunion evolved into a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and love. For Richard, becoming a father late in life was both humbling and enlightening. He had spent decades building his empire, convinced that success would bring fulfillment. But standing beside Elijah at concerts, cheering him on during performances, and simply sharing quiet moments over coffee taught him the true meaning of purpose. "You've shown me what really matters," Richard told Elijah one evening as they strolled through Central Park after a rehearsal. "It's not the money or the accolades, it's the people we touch and the lives we shape." Elijah smiled, appreciating the sincerity in his father's voice. "I think you're getting the hang of this parenting thing," he teased lightly. "But don't get too comfortable. I still have plenty of questions." Richard chuckled, knowing Elijah wasn't exaggerating. Over time, their relationship had shifted from tentative steps to genuine camaraderie. They argued occasionally about career choices, artistic direction, or even mundane things like dinner preferences, but these disagreements only strengthened their bond. Through open conversations, they learned to navigate differences and find common ground. For Elijah, having Richard in his life didn't erase the pain of growing up without a father, but it offered closure and understanding. Meanwhile, Maya continued to play a pivotal role in keeping their family dynamic balanced. Though she no longer needed to shield Elijah from Richard's absence, she remained his rock, offering advice and encouragement whenever he needed it. Her presence ensured that Elijah stayed grounded despite the whirlwind of opportunities coming his way. When Elijah expressed concern about balancing fame with authenticity, Maya reminded him of the values she had instilled in him since childhood. "Stay true to yourself," she said firmly. "No matter how big your platform gets, remember why you started playing music, to connect with others and share your story." Her words resonated deeply with Elijah, guiding him through challenges in the competitive world of professional music. With Richard's connections and Maya's wisdom, Elijah carved out a niche for himself as both a performer and a composer. His unique style blended classical influences with modern rhythms, earning him critical acclaim. Critics often praised his ability to evoke raw emotion through his compositions, attributing it to his personal journey of self-discovery. Yet Elijah knew his success wasn't just his own. It belonged to the people who had shaped him, his mother's sacrifices, his father's redemption, and the community that had supported him every step of the way. One milestone came when Elijah released his debut album, Roots and Wings. The title track, inspired by his complicated yet hopeful upbringing, became an anthem for listeners navigating their own struggles with identity and belonging. In interviews, Elijah openly credited his parents for inspiring the album. "My mom taught me strength and resilience," he explained during a televised interview. "And my dad, well, he showed me that it's never too late to rewrite your story. This album is my way of honoring them and everyone else who has helped me along the way." The album skyrocketed to the top of the charts, solidifying Elijah's place in the music industry. At the award ceremony celebrating its success, Richard stood proudly beside Maya as Elijah accepted the trophy for Best New Artist. As the crowd erupted in applause, Elijah turned to face his parents, holding the award high. "This isn't just mine," he declared. "It belongs to the two people who made me who I am today. Mom, for giving me roots. Dad, for teaching me how to fly." Tears streamed down Maya's face as she clutched Richard's hand tightly. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, not because her son had achieved greatness, but because she saw the unity they had worked so hard to build, reflected in his gratitude. Richard, too, choked back tears, overwhelmed by the realization that he had finally earned the title of father in the eyes of his son. As Elijah's career flourished, Richard and Maya found themselves growing closer as well. Initially wary of each other, they developed a mutual respect born out of shared experiences and a desire to support Elijah. While their relationship remained platonic, they often collaborated to ensure Elijah's needs were met. Whether it was planning surprise birthday celebrations or discussing future projects, they worked together seamlessly, proving that co-parenting could transcend past grievances. Their efforts paid off in unexpected ways. One summer, Elijah organized a benefit concert in his hometown to raise funds for underprivileged children. Inspired by the foundation Richard had created, he wanted to give back to the community that had nurtured him. The event brought together friends, neighbors, and fans from across the country, creating a night filled with music, laughter, and hope. As Richard watched Maya mingling with guests and Elijah captivating the audience with his performance, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for second chances, for the courage to change, and for the family he had almost lost. In quieter moments, Richard reflected on how much he had learned from his son. Elijah's ability to forgive, to see the good in people despite their flaws, had inspired Richard to become a better version of himself. He began volunteering at youth programs, mentoring aspiring musicians, and using his resources to uplift marginalized voices. It was his way of paying forward the lessons Elijah had unknowingly taught him. Maya, too, embraced new opportunities. Encouraged by Elijah's success, she started a non-profit organization aimed at providing music education to underserved communities. "Every child deserves a chance to dream," she said during the launch event. "Music gave my son a voice when he felt unheard. I want to give that same gift to others. By the time Elijah turned 25, their unconventional family had become a symbol of resilience and reconciliation. Neighbors often remarked on how harmoniously Richard, Maya, and Elijah interacted, marveling at their ability to overcome adversity. Friends joked that their story sounded like something out of a movie. A wealthy businessman, a single mother, and their talented son finding their way back to each other against all odds. To those who knew them best, however, it wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the result of hard work, patience, and unconditional love. On Elijah's 25th birthday, Richard hosted a grand celebration at his estate. Guests included family, friends, mentors, and collaborators who had played a role in Elijah's journey. As the evening drew to a close, Richard stood up to make a toast. Holding his glass high, he looked around the room, his gaze lingering on Maya and Elijah. 25 years ago, I made a mistake I thought I could never undo, he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. I walked away from the most important people in my life, thinking I was protecting myself. But life has a funny way of bringing us full circle. Today I stand here surrounded by love, not because I deserve it, but because of the grace and strength of two extraordinary individuals. He paused, turning to face Maya and Elijah. Maya, thank you for raising our son with such incredible values. And Elijah, thank you for letting me be part of your life. You've taught me that it's never too late to start over. The room erupted in applause as Maya wiped away tears and Elijah rose to hug his father. It was a moment of pure joy, a culmination of years of effort, growth, and healing. As fireworks lit up the night sky, casting colorful reflections on their faces, Richard, Maya, and Elijah stood together, united not just by blood but by the unbreakable bonds they had forged. Their story served as a reminder that while the past cannot be changed, the future is always within reach. Redemption may take time, but it is possible for anyone willing to confront their mistakes and embrace the possibility of renewal. For Richard, Maya, and Elijah, the journey had been long and challenging, but it had led them to a place of love, forgiveness, and hope, a place where roots ran deep and wings soared high.